Hey everyone. So we're on day 20, which is 6 days after my last update. Part of that was the weekend, but I've also been super heads down on getting the invoicing creation and editing and displaying all correct and working right. So that's pretty much done now. I've got a few bugs and things to fix, but looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. So if you go to create a new invoice or if you go to edit an invoice, the form looks pretty much the same like this. You can select which client you want. Right now I've only got one client, but obviously if there were more, you would see more in there. We've got the date. I added a nice little JavaScript date picker here, which isn't loading. Let me refresh the page. Speaking of bugs, there we go. I'll figure out what's going on there. But nice little JavaScript date picker. And if you were to switch the client that you're looking, or that this invoice is associated with, everything on the page would change. So if you might recall, you can have a default rate or things like what their payment terms are, things like that, the currency, that can all be tied to a client. You have a default for your account, but you can override it on a client-by-client basis. So if you have a client in the EU, for example, and you're in the US, and you don't want to send them US dollars or an invoice with dollars all over it, you can convert it to euros. I'm going to build in that currency conversion in the future and send it over to them in their home currency. And so if you go to change the client and they have those settings, it'll update the form. That's all interactive now. The other thing I added was the ability to dynamically add line items, which isn't really a big deal technically, but I wanted to make sure that it worked correctly in the Rails world. Using Alpine.js, I finally got everything set up the way that I wanted, so it's nice and clean, and I can move faster with those types of things that I need to do in the future. So you can add a line here. If I were to say I did something nifty and change the quantity to 1.5, for example, you can see the amount due dynamically updating. Or if I update that to 150 an hour, then you can see all these values changing. The other thing is, if I go to delete a row, you get this modal that pops up. This is a global thing that I added, so I can create modals now on any page for confirmation prompts and things like that. Again, thing I really like about Alpine.js is it's just a sprinkling of JavaScript. I don't have to build a brand new React component or a Vue component or anything like that. I can just sprinkle in little directives here and there, and it all works really cleanly in an unobtrusive JavaScript way, which is kind of what Rails prefers. I'll cancel that. I'll go ahead and create this new line item, and you can either save, which is basically just save your draft, save your progress, or you can save it and preview it. And if I do that, I'm taken to this preview page, which has a PDF of the dynamically generated of the invoice that I just created. So I also did that over the past few days. It's a little slow because it's running on my local machine here, but you can see it. This is all generated in a nice little browser-based JavaScript PDF viewer that's embedded in this site using Mozilla's JavaScript viewer. But the nice thing about this is it changes as you change or add or remove or whatever you do to the invoice. It's dynamically created, so it's never out of date. And you can also do things like embed links right in the PDF. So when I hit send to client, once this looks good, they'll get an email with this attachment. The email, of course, will contain links to pay and all of that. But if they email this PDF to an accounts payable department or something like that, whoever has the PDF can also click on these links and pay online, which I still need to implement in the future. I've also got a little link in the footer here as well. The other thing you'll notice that I added is a little activity feed for this specific invoice. So you can see that I created it about a half hour ago, and I added a note right here. So if you need to add reminders to yourself or whatever you want to do, eventually, maybe if I support teams, there can be some conversations going on here. But you can add notes that are tied directly to an invoice, and it'll show up in the activity here. The other thing that I did with the design of the app on the back end is the PDF generation is dynamic and can be templatized. So right now, this design that you see, if you don't like it, I'll add in the ability to create new templates, or to at least select new templates. I guess creating your own templates is a far future thing, but I will have a handful of hopefully nice looking templates that you can pick from depending on your brand, and you can even indicate the colors that you want. I can make all of that dynamic if I want to. And then you can send the invoice right from here. This activity feed will show things like, obviously when you created it, comments that you added, when you sent it, when the client viewed it, when they paid it, all those sorts of things will show up here in the activity feed. So that's pretty much it. The next thing that I'm going to be working on is the time tracking. I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup on the invoices first, little bug fixes and things like that, and then I'll do time tracking, which is the other core part of the app, because once you've recorded a bunch of time, you can take all that time and automatically turn it into an invoice. So that's going to be a really important part of the app that I need to get right. So I want to work on that next. I had hoped to get this done by the end of this month, being July. That's basically this week. Doesn't seem like that's going to happen. That's okay. It might take me another week, maybe two. I don't want to take a whole lot more than that to get something out there for, to start learning for people to use. One other small thing that I added before I forget is if you go to a client now and you go under the related tab here, you can see the invoices that you created for that client. If I had projects for this client, those would show up as well, but I don't. I do need to add a little empty state or something so this doesn't just look broken, but everything's kind of starting to get tied together. After I do time, that'll show up here, and expenses, etc. So making pretty good progress. It's a little bit of a longer update, but I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I love to hear from you. Thank you.